Hey, welcome everybody. This is the last video for this module, which is dealing with data manipulation using the dplyr package. And so the very last function I want to introduce you to in this module is the relocate function, which really just reorders the columns of a data frame. So let's consider the storms data frame that we've been working with. And here's a printout of it. Let me actually take a look at, say, the first 6 rows of this data frame, just so we can see how the columns are ordered in this data frame. Okay, so the relocate function moves one or more columns. And so by default, if I don't kind of specify any additional arguments inside the relocate function, it's going to move the column that I indicate or columns that I indicate to the very first row of the data frame. So for example, if I say storms relocate pressure, and if I weren't doing this with piping, if I just said like relocate storms pressure, that's going to take this pressure column and move it to be the first column in the data frame. And if I ran this code cell, again, I'm not going to do this because it's going to print the entire data frame, or at least like the first 30 rows and the last 30 rows of the data frame to the screen. It's going to be a big mess of stuff to look at, and I don't want to see it. So instead, I'm going to run this code cell below, which is just going to print the first 5 rows of the data frame rather than everything. So here I'm running this same command using the pipe. So this is saying input storms into the relocate function. We're going to relocate pressure. So pressure is going to be moved to the first column. And rather than print out like a big mess of stuff, just print the first 5 rows of the resulting data frame. And now I can see that indeed pressure, which was over here, this column was picked up and now plopped to be the very first column in this data frame. We relocated it to the first position. We can also choose to fine tune this and not just move it to like the very first column in the data frame, but we can choose exactly to where we want to move it. So if instead of moving pressure to the very first column, let's say I want to relocate 2 columns, pressure and status, after the wind column. So if I run this code cell, it's going to take pressure, it's going to take status, and it's going to move both of them after the wind column. So I'm going to run this code cell. It's going to do this using piping. And then this last command is just going to say, rather than like print out a huge data frame, just print out the first 5 rows just to check to make sure that looked right. So now pressure and status got moved after the wind column. So pressure and status are over here after wind. And here's something that's slick since we've seen this before. We've seen this like ends with function. So here, if I want to move like multiple columns that have a name, for example, that ends with meter, like tropical storm force diameter, hurricane force diameter, that is going to take both of these columns because they both end with the character string meter. And this is going to move them, for example, before the column status. So it's going to take these two and move them before status. So they should wind up in between pressure and status. And this will just print out the first 5 rows of that data frame. So now hurricane force diameter and tropical storm force diameter, these two were both moved just before status. That which was right over here. Okay. So great. That is a wrap on, oh, I see. And so, yeah, so one thing that's kind of important to note here is that if you're kind of looking at this previous data frame and you're like, hey, you said you're going to move tropical force diameter and hurricane force diameter before status, these, why isn't pressure right before them over here? Like pressure is now the last column over here. It's because we're relocating the storms data frame, which is way up here. So here we're taking these two columns and moving them before status in the storms data frame over here. So that's it. When we were relocating things over here, we didn't store this output over here. We just printed it to the screen and we didn't store it anywhere. So now when I run this command over here, we're still working with the original storms data frame that we're relocating, and we're not working with the previous step that we had over here. So in this stage over here, we're relocating tropical force storm diameter, hurricane force storm diameter in the original storms data set. We're picking up these two columns and moving them before status. So that's why they wind up after longitude and before status when I look at the output down here, because we're manipulating the original storms data frame that we started with. Okay, so that is a wrap for our intro to dplyr with this module. Hope you had a nice, gentle introduction to dplyr and piping, and hope you get some practice on the homework. And let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone.